It's showtime, baby. Get your popcorn ready.
Ladies and gentlemen.
4, 3, 2,
Ladies and gentlemen.
1.
What's good, family? Welcome back to your show and mine, Bobby Ramos-Bottom Line. I've been wanting to do this one for a little while. Just got caught up in a lot of other things, but this man is so deserving. And you, the audience, you're deserving of knowing a lot more about this trailblazer, about this icon. And I'd like to talk to you today. This is why I called this The Man You Didn't Know. William Fenton Russell. The man you didn't know. Just recently passed. And it's just so much, he was so much more than just a great basketball player, because that's what we hear all the time. And you hear a little bit about him being a civil rights activist. You hear a little bit about that, but he had so much depth to him, and he got involved with so many things. I've done a lot of research on him over the years, whether it was shows and Sports Century and all these old time shows. And remember, he didn't like talking a lot. You know, he didn't like dealing with the media too much. But there is a lot of stuff out there about him. So that's what we're going to get into. And I also read his book from 1979 it's a memoir. It's called The Second Wind. And it's the memoirs of an opinionated man. And that's what this cat was. He was an opinionated man, without a doubt. So there's just so many things I just wanted you folks need to know more about Bill Russell than he was just a great basketball player. Really, really great for the NBA. They retired his number 6. That number can't be given out again. There are 24 players right now in the league who still have that number 6, like LeBron James. They can wear it until their career is over, but the number 6 can never be given out again. I mentioned real quick, and we'll talk a little bit later about his civil rights activism, but he was so iconic, and he was so the man during this time when the late great Jackie Robinson passed away. Mr. Robinson's widow, Rachel Robinson, asked Bill Russell to be a pallbearer for Jackie Robinson's funeral in 1972, which he did do. So he was a pallbearer for Jackie Robinson. A brilliant man. You know, I've talked to Jim Brown a lot about him. He was real tight with Jim Brown. They were neighbors. But Russell was a voracious reader. But what stuck with him as a kid at the library, he was reading this American history book, and there was a chapter on the American Revolution. And it said, I quote, and this came from his book, "Despite the hardships they suffered, most slaves enjoyed a higher standard of living, a better life in America than they had in their primitive African homeland," close quote. Now, Russell said that this book stayed with him throughout his life and framed his mindset when it came to Black folks here in America. Now, he grew up in Oakland. There's a lot of great athletes from Oakland, a lot of them. But he said he went through a lot of stuff with police officers stopping him and calling him a nigger. And from those days on, he said whenever he felt hostility from somebody, he assumed that it was their problem rather than his. He tried out for his high school. You know, Jordan likes to tell the story how he got cut in high school. But Bill Russell tried out for his high school JV team where they had 15 spots. And they only had 15 jerseys, of course. And the coach didn't want to cut anybody. So Russell and this other kid, this kid named Roland Campbell, they were the 15th and 16th players on the team. And Bill Russell and this kid Roland, they would take turns. One guy would play one game, the other guy would sit in the bleachers. The next game, they would switch. The other guy would play, and the other guy would sit in the stands. But eventually, realizing how great Russell was, in his 3 years playing on this high school team, they only lost 3 games. In 3 years, they lost 3 games. So now he goes on to the University of San Francisco, called USF, and his roommate was his future teammate, star teammate with the Celtics, who was living up here in Hartford for many years of his life until he passed, the one and only K.C. Jones. And K.C. Jones was even more shy than Bill Russell. Bill Russell had a very shy side to him, but K.C. Jones was even more of a shy guy. Now, the freshman team where Russell was on, they went 19-4. 19-4. And his junior and senior year, University of San Francisco won national championships both years. He had a college record those last 2 years of 57-1. I don't think he hurt 57 wins and 1 loss. He said he was well aware of racism in college because he said in his junior year at USF, the team went 28-1, won the Final Four. He was a first-team All-American, averaged 20 points, 20 rebounds. That's right, 20 points and 20 rebounds was his average. He was named the NCAA tournament MVP. Season's over. He said he gets back in home, and there was a sports banquet in North California, and they picked another player as the MVP, a white center who had much less impressive set of accomplishments as a player than Russell. And all Russell said about it was, and I quote, he said, "I could have been hurt by that, but I simply dismissed the award." He simply dismissed the award, close quote. That gives you a little insight into how he was going to be later in his career when it came to awards. But in his memoir, like I told you, it was written in 1979. It makes me think about today and all the rabid fanhood that we have going on these days. And he said in that book about rabid fans, and I quote, he said, "If a fan is an embarrassment to the human race at the Super Bowl, it's not because he's at the Super Bowl. It's because he's an embarrassment to the human race. Like alcohol, sports doesn't lie. What it reveals about a person under the influence was just hiding." And he said that people sometimes use sports as a way to deny responsibility for what they really are, close quote. And man, does that fits today. And here's what he said about racism in sports also. You know, he took a lot of stances. And I know some players today a few are starting to stand up. But this is what he said about racism in sports in his memoir. And I quote, he said, "Racism on the part of the audience can still be mean and nasty, but owners can't afford it if they want to win. Inside sports, racism has become more subtle," close quote. Thinking about that brings me to a lot of situations like with Colin Kaepernick's situation and things like that. But this was Bill Russell speaking out on these issues back in 79. I feel that. This was 79 that he was speaking out on these kinds of issues. And for him to say racism in sports has become more subtle, I tell you what that makes me think of. Currently, it makes me think of a lot about people like former Buccaneers and Raiders coach and TV analyst John Gruden, who was fired because of his racist viewpoints that kept quiet. Everybody kept quiet for years. They knew about it, but they kept quiet for years until, oh my God, his emails got leaked. Oh my God. And then everybody was all shocked. Now, there was a lot of people within the NFL that weren't shocked because they had got emails from him. They had talked to this cat. They weren't shocked. They were all just quiet about it. Whether they were like-minded or not, they were quiet about it. But back to Russell. Remember what I said earlier about him winning the? He only won Player of the Year one time in college. One time. Makes me think about Jim Brown never winning the Heisman. And Paul Hornung did, but Jim Brown never did. But here's Russell. He was Player of the Year one time in college, was his second year. Fast forward to him being in the NBA. When he was chosen MVP, he wasn't even on the first, for many sports writers, he wasn't even on the first team, all NBA team. He's MVP for the year, but for most sports writers, he wasn't even on the first all NBA team. Again, to tie in Russell back from the 70s to today, you can easily fast forward to today with all of the legal sports gambling going on. And Russell talked about how betting in professional sports didn't mix and how he was offered money to win by only a certain amount of points. It was even back then. So he wasn't a fan of it. And I just see a lot of problems stemming from it in today's game. It's just gonna air its ugly side. It just really is down the road. Another difference in the game today, everybody talks about the trades and setting up teams and all this power team. They're always power teams. But anyway, this shocked me that in Russell's 13-year career with the Celtics, 13 years with the Celtics, they made a total of one trade in 13 years. One trade. And that's when they got Mel Counts for Bailey Howell. That's it. This wasn't Count Dracula. They got Mel Counts. It was the only trade that they made in 13 years. And that just shows how the game has changed so much. And of course, then players couldn't move the way they have been able to now, thanks to Oscar Robertson, who's the Kurt Flood of basketball of the NBA. But we'll talk about that for another episode. But Russell said that Bob Cousy, his teammate point guard, he said he was the smartest player that he ever played with. But they weren't close. They weren't close at all. They never sat down and they never had talks like real friends would. In that old Sports Century show that they did about Bill Russell, and Bill Russell wasn't even in it because he just wasn't dealing with the media, like I said. But I still have it on a VCR tape in there in my closet there. But Bob Cousy was crying. And I quote, he said, "I wish I'd done more to support Russ with all the racial things going on around him," close quote. And he was crying about it. He put his head down. He started crying. In 1961, the Celtics were supposed to play an exhibition game in Lexington, Kentucky, of all places. At the Players Hotel, they went downstairs to eat, but the black players couldn't be served. Okay. After all the black players met in Russell's room, Satch Sanders, Casey Jones, who I mentioned, Sam Jones, and Russell, they all decided not to play. Red Auerbach, Mr. Cigar, didn't want to lose a big payday, so he put it to a vote, and all 7 white players decided to play. About that incident, I read Bob Cousy's book also. Now, Cousy was the team captain, and in his book, I read his book, and he said, and I quote, "Why did I play? What was I thinking? It was an exhibition game. Why did I say something, especially as a team captain?" He went on to say, "They're paying me to watch African Americans struggle for acceptance and inclusion, but I remained quiet. I should have said, let's go have a beer. Let's go to a movie. I was the senior member. I had a good relationship with the media. I could have reached out and shared his pain a little bit with him. I never did that with Russ," close quote. They just weren't tight. Now, when Cousy retired, at the end of this 1963 season. And the Celtics had won 6 NBA championships in 7 years together with Russell and Cousy. Russell went to the podium, okay? He goes to the podium, and he said that he considered Cousy a brother and that there were very few men like Cousy. Russell then, which was unusual for him, he became emotional when he said that. Again, in Cousy's book, he said he never responded. And I quote, he said, "What was I thinking? Why did I get up, go across the room, and give him a hug?" Close quote. That's just, they just weren't tight. Also, in Cousy's book, he talked about, he had all this grief about how he wasn't there for Russell, knowing that Russell was a black player, a superstar black player, the best player on the team. And they're in Boston, of all places, and all the racial stuff that Russell was going through, which I'll get into a little bit later. He said that when their careers were way over, he said it's 20 years down the road. And he wrote Russell a letter apologizing and saying how he should have stepped up and blah, blah, blah. He never heard back from Russell. A couple of years later, they're at some kind of banquet together somewhere. I don't remember exactly where it was. But anyway, Cousy goes up to Russell. He said, "Bill, did you get the letter I mailed you?" And he said, Russell said, "Yeah, I got it," and just walked away. That's very telling. Very, very, very telling right there. Now, let me give you a couple of sidebars about Russell, the player. Everybody still talks about Donovan McNabb supposedly throwing up during the Super Bowl in the huddle. Russell threw up before every game. Now, here's the biggest winner. He threw up before every game. They were getting ready to play in a playoff game, and the players were on the court. They hadn't started playing yet, still doing warm-ups. And Auerbach says, "Russ, you didn't throw up yet. Go back inside and throw up." The team goes in with him. He goes in and throws up, and now they're ready to play. And of course, yeah, they won the game. He never, you think about the old adage about Jim Brown always getting up slow. And he said it was to show that he was never hurt. He always got up slow, so that when he did get hurt, you wouldn't be able to tell. He didn't get up fast all the time, but when he got hurt, he'd get up slow. He just always got up slow. Russell never ran out of the huddle to, jump the jump ball to start the game. While players were slapping five and pumping themselves up, he said he always walked slow with his arms folded in front of him, and he would just stand there with a look on his face. And he said he wanted that look to say, "Hey, the king is here tonight." Now check that out. Imagine if a player said that today. If LeBron James or any superstar player, the media, the fans would kill him for being so cocky and so arrogant. Here's Bill Russell saying he would just stand there like, "Hey, the king is here tonight." And he was right. Throughout his career, he spent a lot of time off the court with Elgin Baylor, Oscar Robertson, Wilt Chamberlain. And it's funny because me growing up reading sports as a kid, I always read about the animosity between Russell and Chamberlain and how all these NBA players hated each other. And that wasn't the case. Russell and Chamberlain were great friends. Russell, when he played in Philadelphia against Chamberlain's 76ers, he would go to Russell's house for dinner. Russell's mother would cook. And one time, as they were leaving, Chamberlain's mother tapped Russell in the arm and said, "You take it easy on my boy tonight." So they were just really that tight. But Russell said that he never told anybody he was retiring except for Oscar Robertson. That's how tight they were. And in his book, he also talked about how he was very mad, very upset with Chamberlain, and it caused a lot of friction over a number of years. That incident where they're playing in the finals and Chamberlain hurt his knee with 5 minutes left and took himself out of the game. Now, this was Russell's last game. Chamberlain didn't know it, but it was Russell's last game. And Chamberlain took himself out with 5 minutes left. Of course, there was a big thing. 76ers started coming back, and Chamberlain wanted to go back in and got into a big argument with his coach, Butch Van Bredekoff. And the Celtics went on to win by a couple of points. But Russell always held that against Chamberlain because Russell felt he was going out the door. He wanted to go up against the best in his last few minutes. And it took them years before they talked it out and got it over and put it in their past. Bill Russell was extremely drawn to Martin Luther King and also Malcolm X. But in his book, he talked about how he had reservations about Dr. King because white people in Boston liked him so much, he felt there had to be something wrong with him. I found that unique right there. It just was to me. Russell also said Boston was the most racist city in the country. He said that it was a flea market of racism. He said that Boston was corrupt. City Hall had crony racists, send them back to Africa racists. And he had no doubt that the people in Boston knew who these other people were every day. He said that he had never been in a city more involved with finding new ways to dismiss, ignore, or look down on other people. You know, that I got to get into what happened with Bill Russell. Somebody broke into his house and they didn't steal anything. He's on a road trip. They didn't steal anything, but they defecated in his bed and wrote nigger on the walls. Of course, they were never caught. Russell had problems with this Boston City police because they were always messing with his house when he was gone, and the cops always said that they didn't know who it was and they couldn't do anything about it. So Russell was just going through a lot of stuff. And you got to understand something. The Celtics had some noteworthy great black players on their team. Not just Russell. As I said, Casey Jones, Sam Jones, Satch Sanders. One of the things that Russell remembered big time was a poll done by Celtic fans in Boston. Remember, they're a winning organization more than anybody. And when the fans were asked how they could increase attendance, the number one response was to have fewer black guys on the team. That was quoted in his book. The poll said the number one response from fans was to have fewer black guys on the team. So they weren't happy with winning all the championship. They just wanted fewer brothers on the team. The story about Russell not showing up to have his number retired in Boston, he said he wasn't feeling it. He said he was playing for the Celtics, not for Boston. That's how much he just flat out hated Boston. He wasn't comfortable having his number retired. Red Auerbach called him every few months to try to get him to change his mind. Fast forward, he didn't until years later. Listen, he didn't even want to go into the Basketball Hall of Fame because, as he said, he thought it was a racist institution, and he had very little faith and what it meant. So he was never into testimonials, dinners, souvenirs, memories until the last 10, 15 years or so. And to be perfectly honest, that was because of money. His daughter has even, who's the lawyer, even said, he changed his mind because of money. And that's why you didn't see or hear from Russell for many years. And then he agreed to have his number retired when there was nobody in the arena, by the way, prior to a game. And you started seeing him all over the place. A very good friend of mine was drafted from Bridgeport, was drafted by the Seattle Supersonics, and Bill Russell was the head coach. And Russell loved that he was defensively so tough, could score with anybody. I believe he averaged like 26 points a game his last year at Seattle University. And but it was something in there, which I'm going to read from the book because I don't want to mess this up. But this friend of mine, rookie year, he missed 30 games because he had knee surgery, and he didn't hang around the team. And as a result, teammates voted that they just gave him half a share of the $10,000 share from the Seattle going to the playoffs. And that was something that bothered Russell. And I'm going to read directly from his book as coach of Seattle. He says, I quote, "As it is true with most losing teams, the Sonics had fragile egos, and they spent a lot of time looking for reasons not to play, pointing fingers at each other and blaming everyone but themselves. The older players in particular were always comparing paychecks with their teammates and everybody else around the league, looking for excuses not to make an effort. In order to win in such an atmosphere, I had to start yelling, saying things to people that I never would have stood for when I was playing myself. On the Sonics, the players who showed signs of self-motivation became infected by the attitudes of the rest of the team. Then something happened that made me snap." Now that's the situation that I'm talking about. "The players met alone, as NBA teams do, to divide up their playoff money, and the prevailing faction voted to keep every dime for themselves. They even withheld the complimentary amounts given to such support people in the clubhouse, such as trainer, people in the front office, and assistant coach. One player, who I just mentioned, hurt his knee before the season was over, so they reduced his share. One healthy man had not been playing much, so they wanted to reduce his share, and I couldn't believe it. The money involved was a trifling sum compared to what they made. I felt so badly about this situation that I called in a couple of players and asked the team to vote again, even though it's not really any of the coach's affair. But the result wasn't much better the second time around. The majority of the team was determined to act in a way that flew in the face of simple decency." This is real heavy here. He says, "Since it was my habit simply not to talk to people I don't like, I found it harder and harder to have discussions with many of the players. It was obvious to them that I didn't like them, and naturally, they didn't like me either. Early in my fourth season with the Sonics, I knew it would be my last. I was withdrawn, not giving the players what I knew, not being as good of a coach as I could have been." That's some deep stuff. That's some deep stuff coming from not just the NBA Hall of Famer, but an icon to the game. He's some really hard-hitting, deep things. And that's why I think he got burnt out. As he said, his fourth year there, I was told by some members of that team that Russell just didn't care. He would schedule practice around his tea time. when he went to the Sacramento Kings, he had a different side to him sometimes. And he had some stank on him. When he was fired by the Sacramento Kings, he had been a coach. And he just cleared out his office and put his house on the market immediately, stayed in his house for weeks. He didn't want to read the press or watch TV. He went out to play golf. He didn't watch TV, as I said, or read the newspapers. He said to this day, people didn't know. He didn't know what people said about him when he got fired. He could be that aloof and that distant from people if you really ticked him off. Let me go backwards a little bit here too. There's that famous clip with Allen Iverson, practice, and everybody makes fun of that and makes it seem like Allen Iverson, just didn't like to practice. What people don't know was at that time a friend of his had got shot and killed, and he just wasn't in the best of moods, which is really understandable. But when that ball was thrown up, Iverson was there. He was there to play. And he's one of the biggest and best warriors the NBA's ever seen. But he gets a lot of flack for that. Well, listen, Bill Russell in his day was allowed to skip practice. He would tell Red Auerbach he wasn't feeling right. He wasn't feeling good that day. He needed some, whatever the case may be. He was allowed to skip practice, sit in the stands. Sometimes he'd sit in the stands and read the paper while his teammates practiced. So this wasn't just something that Iverson or somebody had a problem with, or as I can't think of the guy's name, Byron, the guy, former starter for the Lakers, who went on to coach the Nets when they went to the finals. Byron Scott just came to me. He recently said Kenyon Martin from University of Cincinnati. They'd have to drag him to play. He hated to practice, but he forgave him because he said once the ball went up, he showed up. Once the game started, he showed up every time. So there's just players like that. I just thought about something else. When I talked about the Sports Century program, our program that they did on Russell, the reason why, and Russell had this petty side to him. The reason why he didn't partake in his own documentary about him, he said, because one day he's watching ESPN and he heard the announcer praise the '64 Celtics as Bob Cousy's team back in the day. Not his team, Cousy's team. And that ticked him off. So that's why he never wanted anything to do with ESPN or Sports Century. That's why, even though for his own thing, he wasn't there. So I hope I'm giving you a lot of information you may not have known about him. Of course, everybody knows he didn't sign autographs. He didn't even sign autographs for teammates like one of his best friends, Sat Sanders. He had a photograph of all the team, and he wanted all the players to sign it for him personally. And he got everybody's signature, and he goes up to Russell, last one he needed, to get his signature. And Russ goes, "You know me well enough to know I don't sign autographs." And Sat said, "I'm not a fan. I'm your teammate. I'm your teammate." He goes, "That's why you should," Russell said, "That's why you should know better. I'm not signing." And he didn't. So, and it's funny, as I said earlier, his daughter Karen, who attended Georgetown, the lawyer, she said that, he was later in life, he was signing 500 balls a year. Signing 500 autographs a year and some basketballs for collectibles stores to hold, their events and to sell them. So another thing I wanted to add, I know that Red Auerbach gets a lot of credit for being basketball's version of Branch Rickey, who brought Jackie Robinson into the Dodgers, as Auerbach named Bill Russell the first African-American coach in the NBA. But truth be told, He was the fourth choice. Red Auerbach first asked Bob Cousy, Tommy Heinsohn, and Frank Ramsey if they wanted to coach, and they all turned it down probably because they didn't want to follow Red Auerbach. But he wasn't the great emancipator Auerbach. He went to three other players first. But he also knew where his bread was buttered, Auerbach, because the team, Cousy had missed a 5-game road trip, and Boston won all 5. While on the plane, Auerbach heard how the press was already printing, will Cousy play in the next home game? When the plane landed, Cousy called an emergency meeting at the hotel to tell the players that Russell was the man. He saw that problem coming. He knew it was coming. And I don't see a lot of coaches in today's game doing that, but Red Auerbach did. A few years ago in Slam magazine, I still have the copy, and Bill Russell said, I've never cared about being liked, only respected, close quote. And that reminds me of what Malcolm X said, because I use that myself. If they don't respect you, make them fear you. Russell also, with that side of being an activist and pushing forward, he was the one in the 60s who forced the NBA to start hiring black referees because he was constantly complaining that there were none. He was the one who forced the NBA to start hiring black refs. He also said about the racial problems going on in those days, which are still going on today. But he said in his book, when it came to racial strife, he said, and I quote, the injustices took a toll. I'll never forget having to drive through day and night to get to some place, ignoring the cries of your own children because there was no place to stop and eat or rest, no hotel or restaurant that would accept our blackness. None of my medals or championships could shield my children from white supremacy, close quote. That's some deep stuff right there. That's some deep stuff. Another thing, when civil rights pioneer Medgar Evers was murdered by the KKK, his brother Charlie asked Russell if he could do a series of integrated basketball camps for children, which Russell did. Russell marched on Washington, supported Muhammad Ali in that famous picture you see with Jim Brown and Willie Davis, the Green Bay Packers, and a young Lou Alcindor. But after he marched on Washington and supported Ali, the death threats started coming for Bill Russell. And he said in his book, and I quote, I wasn't scared of what kind of men who come in the dark of night. But the fact is, I never felt it to be useful. He was deep, man. Those are some of the reasons why Russell was a major activist, even in his later years. That famous picture where he backed Colin Kaepernick, and he took a knee with the Medal of Freedom around his neck, which he had gotten from President Barack Obama. He took a knee with that medal around his neck, and it's a powerful picture. It was a powerful statement. But he was a powerful man even in the 60s. And yeah, that's why the FBI had a file on Bill Russell that referred to him, and I quote, as an arrogant Negro. Okay? So, folks, I hope I gave you a lot of stuff. I know this took some time, but there was just so much about this cat, Bill Russell, that was bigger and deeper than basketball. Yeah, like Tommy Heinsohn, my buddy Tommy Heinsohn said, in Boston, they got a Tom Brady streak and all these other players. He said nobody has ever won like Bill Russell. And that's true. In 13 seasons, he won 11 championships in 13 seasons. Like I said, they had 14 games. You either win or go home, and they won all 14. So, yes, great player. Amazing player, the biggest winner in sports history. Yeah, he is the biggest winner in sports history. But for all that winning, he was even a better man. I laid out so many things that I hope that young people can watch this and learn from it. And you mothers and fathers who watch this can spread some of this to your kids and grandkids. He was the real deal. And I was not a Celtic fan. I was a Bill Russell fan as I got older and started learning about him. But the more I learned, the more I respected him. So I just wanted to put that out there. It's just very important that history be told, the full history, the true history be told the right way. I don't care whether you're talking about sports, politics, whatever. The full truth, the real truth has to be told. One of the things I learned from Jim Brown that he said to me is, one thing about freedom is everybody should have it. One thing about truth is everybody should tell it. Thank you, family, for your continued support of your show and mine, Bobby Ramos-BottomLine. I don't do interviews, I do conversations. I don't want to be a man of power, but I do want to be a man of purpose. Thank you for your time, this time, until next time. And at that point, folks, I hope you enjoyed this segment about the Bill Russell that you didn't know. I hope you enjoy my YouTube channel, Bobby Ramos-BottomLine. If you do like the content that I'm putting out there, please hit the subscribe button. Help me to keep doing this. Hit that subscribe button. So tell your family and friends about it. Let them know that there's a place that they can go to hear the word they never heard. Thanks a lot and have a great day, everybody. Thank you. Did another one, Lil Bobby. Great job. Love you.